My brother told everyone I was mentally unwell and could not live alone just to take everything I had. When I proved every single one of them wrong, he lost far more than he ever expected. The first thing I noticed was that people were looking at me differently. Not dramatically. Not the specific obvious shift of people who have received information and are performing its reception. Something subtler. The particular quality of eyes that are assessing rather than simply seeing, that are measuring you against something they have been told about you and finding the comparison interesting. My neighbor Carol, who had waved at me from her driveway every morning for 4 years with the specific cheerful automaticity of someone for whom the wave had long since become reflex, paused on a Wednesday morning and looked at me for a half-second longer than the wave required. My colleague Theodore, who sat across from me in the open-plan office, and who had the comfortable familiarity of someone you have worked alongside for 2 years, asked me how I was doing with the specific careful emphasis on the doing that communicated he meant something beyond the social formality of the question. I noticed. I catalogued. I did not yet know what I was cataloging. I found out on a Thursday evening at my friend Ren's birthday dinner. There were 8 of us at the table, and the dinner had the specific warm ease of a group of people who have known each other long enough to be comfortable and not so long as to have run out of things to say. Ren was across from me, and to my left was a woman named Cicely who I knew peripherally, a friend of Ren's from her book club who had been included in the larger gathering. Cicely was warm and direct, and we had been talking easily for an hour when she said something that stopped the conversation between us while the rest of the table continued. She said, "I have to tell you something because I think you should know, but I did not know if anyone had told you." I looked at her. "I know your brother," she said. "Not well. Through a mutual connection. We were at a gathering 2 weeks ago and your name came up." She paused. "He told a group of people that you had been struggling significantly with your mental health. That you had been having episodes and that the family was worried you could not manage on your own." The table noise continued around us. Someone was laughing at something at the far end. "He said this," I said. "Carefully. He said it to at least 6 people," she said. People who know you." I almost did not say anything because I did not know how to say it. But I kept thinking about how I would want to know. "Thank you," I said. "For telling me." I finished the dinner. I ate and I laughed at the appropriate moments, and I was present in the way you are present when something significant is happening underneath the surface, and the surface must be maintained because the dinner is Ren's birthday and Ren's birthday is not the place. I drove home and I sat in my car in the parking garage of my building, and I thought about Carol's half-second pause and Theodore's careful emphasis on doing and the specific quality of eyes that are assessing rather than seeing. My brother's name is Nolan. He is 38 and I am 35, and we have been the only 2 children of parents who died within 14 months of each other, my father first and then my mother, the second loss arriving before the grief of the first had found its shape. The DTHS had left an estate. Not enormous. Sufficient. A house and savings and the specific accumulated material of 2 people who had lived carefully and had left what they left to be divided between their children. The estate had not been divided. Not yet. The process was ongoing, in the specific slow way of legal processes that involve property and multiple parties and the particular friction of a sibling relationship that had been strained before the DTHS and was navigated more carefully after them. Nolan was handling the estate administration because Nolan was older and had offered, and I had agreed because at the time of my mother's DTH I had been in the specific consuming grief of someone who had lost both parents in 14 months, and the administrative details had felt like the part someone else could carry. Nolan had offered to carry it. I had let him. I sat in the car and I thought about the gathering 2 weeks ago and the 6 people and the episodes he had described and the family being worried I could not manage on my own. I thought about the estate administration that was ongoing. I thought about the house that had not yet been sold and the savings that had not yet been distributed and the specific position of a person who controls the timeline of a process that involves someone else's inheritance. I thought about those things in sequence and I understood what I was looking at. My name is Ada. I'm 35 years old and I have an apartment I pay for with money I earn and a job I have held for 6 years and a life I have built and maintained through 2 parental DTHS in 14 months, which is the specific credential of someone who has demonstrated the capacity to manage themselves under conditions that would have produced genuine instability in many people and had produced, in me, grief that was real and managed alongside everything else. I had not had episodes. I had grieved. The difference between those 2 things is the difference between a person who is experiencing something and a person who cannot manage themselves, and Nolan had described the second to 6 people who knew me, and he was the administrator of an estate that was mine to have. I went upstairs. I made tea. I called my friend Declan, who had been in my life for 11 years and who knew both me and, peripherally, Nolan, and who had the specific quality of someone who delivered honest assessments without the softening that made honest assessments less useful. I told him what Cicely had said. He was quiet for a moment. How long has the estate been in administration? He said. The first question. The correct first question. 11 months, I said. What is a normal timeline for something like that? He said. 6 to 8 months for a straightforward estate, I said. Ours is not complicated. A house and savings. There is no reason it should take longer than 8 months. And Nolan controls the timeline, he said. He is the administrator, I said. Yes. Another silence. The specific silence of someone assembling pieces into a picture. He is telling people you cannot manage on your own, Declan said. While he controls an estate that is half yours. At 11 months when it should have been done at 8. Yes, I said. Ada, he said. I know, I said. What are you going to do? He said. I need to know the full extent of what he has said and to whom, I said. Before I do anything else, I need to know the shape of it. How are you going to find that out? He said. Cicely said 6 people at the gathering, I said. 6 people who know me. The half-second pause from Carol. Theodore at work. I paused. It has been going further than one gathering. Yes, he said. I think it has. I need to know how far, I said. And then, he said. And then I need a lawyer, I said. Not for the estate specifically. For everything. I spent the following week mapping the shape of it. Not by asking questions that would have alerted Nolan to what I was doing. By listening. By returning Theodore's careful emphasis with an honest answer about how I was doing that was specific and grounded and that communicated, in its specificity, someone who was managing their life with complete competence. By having coffee with Carol and talking for 40 minutes about the neighborhood and my work and the specific ordinary texture of my daily life. By being visible and coherent and present in all the places where Nolan's version of me had been circulating. What I found in the listening was worse than I had expected. Cicely's 6 people was not the full number. The narrative had been moving through a network that included mutual family friends, people who had known my parents, people who were tangentially connected to both Nolan and me and who had received Nolan's version of my mental state in the specific confident delivery of a concerned older brother who wanted people to understand why the estate was taking time, why Ada was struggling to engage with the process, why it was complicated. He had been explaining the delay through me. The delay that he controlled had been attributed to my instability. My inability to engage with the process. The family's concern that I was not in a position to make decisions about my own inheritance. I had not been asked to make a single decision about my inheritance. Not one. 11 months of administration and Nolan had not sent me a single document requiring my signature or input. The process had been entirely managed by him, from his end, with no engagement requested from me, and he had been telling people that the delay was because of my capacity. I found an attorney on the following Monday. Her name was Philippa and she was 47 and she had the specific focused quality of someone who had spent 20 years in estate law and had encountered the shape of what I was describing before and had clear opinions about it. I told her everything in sequence. The THS. The estate. Nolan's role as administrator. The 11 months. What Cicely had reported. What the mapping of the narrative had revealed. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked me for the estate documents. I told her I did not have them. She asked why I did not have them. I told her because Nolan had been administering the estate and had not provided me with copies. She looked at me. He has been administering your parents' estate for 11 months and you have not received copies of the relevant documents. No, I said. That is the first thing we are going to fix, she said. She sent the formal request that afternoon. Nolan's response arrived 4 days later through his own attorney, which told me he had been expecting something like this and had prepared for it, which told me the preparation had been part of a plan that had been longer than the 4 days since Philippa's request. The response said that as estate administrator he had been managing a complex process, and that the delay was due to various complications including difficulty engaging with all beneficiaries. Philippa, read it. She set it down. She looked at me with the specific expression of someone who has seen this sentence before and knows exactly what it means and what it does not mean. He is claiming you are the complication, she said. Yes, I said. While you have never been asked for a single signature, she said. Correct, I said. We are going to request the full accounting, she said. Every document. Every transaction. Everything that has moved through this estate in 11 months. She paused. And we are going to request it formally, on the record, with a response deadline. What do you think we are going to find? I said. She looked at her desk. The specific look of someone who has an opinion and is deciding how directly to share it. I think we are going to find out why 11 months was not long enough, she said. The documents arrived 3 weeks later. I sat in Philippa's office on a Tuesday afternoon and we went through them together, and what we found in them was the thing that reframed everything, the thing that made the narrative Nolan had been building not just harmful but strategic, not just a lie but a construction designed to serve a specific purpose. The house had been appraised 6 months ago by an appraiser connected to a property company where Nolan had a professional relationship. The appraisal had come in significantly below market value. And there was a draft purchase agreement in the documents, not finalized, but drafted, between the estate and a numbered company that Philippa spent 40 minutes tracing through corporate registry records. The numbered company had a director. The director was Nolan. Philippa set down the corporate registry documents and looked at me across the desk. He was going to buy the house, she said. Through a company he controlled. At a below-market appraisal. With himself as the estate administrator approving the transaction. From himself, I said. Effectively, she said. With your half of the proceeds based on the suppressed value. I sat in the chair across from her desk and I looked at the documents spread between us, and I thought about the 11 months and the 6 people at the gathering and Carol's half-second pause and Theodore's careful emphasis and the narrative that had been built and distributed through a network of people who knew me, or knew people who knew me, or had known my parents. He had needed me to seem unstable. Not vaguely troubled. Specifically unable to manage my own affairs. The kind of unstable that could justify, if it ever came to it, why decisions about the estate had been made without my full engagement. Why the process had taken so long. Why, if the transaction had gone through, a below-market sale might have been the best that could be managed given the complications. The complications being me. What do we do? I said. Philippa had a list. It was not a short list. She delivered it with the specific methodical clarity of someone who had prepared for this conversation before I arrived and who knew the sequence of what needed to happen and in what order. The first thing was a formal complaint to the court overseeing the estate administration. Administrators have legal obligations. The obligations include transparency, the provision of documents to beneficiaries, the avoidance of self-dealing transactions, the management of the estate in the interests of all parties. Nolan had not met these obligations. The complaint would put the administration under court supervision. The second thing was a formal cease and desist directed at Nolan personally regarding the statements he had been making about my mental health and capacity. Defamation had a specific legal definition, and what Nolan had been doing met elements of it. The cease and desist would not be the end of that matter, but it would be the beginning of a formal record. The third thing was an independent appraisal of the house. The fourth thing was the removal of Nolan as administrator. Can we do that? I said. He has demonstrably failed his fiduciary obligations, Philippa said. The self-dealing transaction alone is sufficient. Combined with a failure to provide documents to a beneficiary over 11 months, yes. We can do that. I sat with the list. He is my brother, I said. Not as a defense of him. As a statement of a fact that had weight independent of what he had done. I know, she said. This is going to end whatever remains of that, I said. Yes, she said. It is likely to. She paused. What I can tell you is what it will not end, which is your ability to receive what your parents left you, to have an accurate appraisal of a house that is half yours, and to have the narrative that has been built about your capacity formally addressed. And him, I said. What does this do to him? At minimum he loses the administrator role, she said. The self-dealing transaction, if it had been completed, would have been a significant legal exposure. That it was not completed works in his favor legally. But the attempt is documented. The suppressed appraisal is documented. The failure to provide beneficiary documents is documented. She paused. What happens professionally and socially to a person whose attempt to purchase their parents' estate property through a shell company becomes a matter of court record is not something I can control. But it tends to become known. He told people I could not manage on my own, I said. Yes, she said. People who knew my parents, I said. Family, friends. People at my work. Yes, she said. What becomes known, I said, will reach those same people. It tends to, she said. I authorized the complaint that afternoon. I authorized the cease and desist. I authorized the independent appraisal request. I drove home and I made dinner and I called Declan and I told him what the documents had contained and what we were doing, and he listened to all of it, and when I finished he said one thing. Are you okay? He said. Not about the legal situation. About me. I do not know yet, I said honestly. Ask me in 6 months. The court process moved with a specific pace of legal processes, which is slower than urgency demands and faster than resignation expects. The complaint was filed. The court acknowledged it. An independent administrator was appointed to oversee the estate pending the review of Nolan's conduct. The new administrator was a professional executor, A woman named Margaret who had been doing this work for 23 years and who moved through the estate documents with the specific efficient thoroughness of someone who had no stake in any particular outcome and wanted only to find the accurate picture. The independent appraisal of the house came in $41,000 above Nolan's appraisal. $41,000. The difference between what my parents' house was worth and what the appraisal connected to Nolan's professional contact had said it was worth. $20,000 of that difference was my share. The court review of Nolan's administration found multiple failures of fiduciary duty. The self-dealing transaction attempt was the most significant finding. The failure to provide beneficiary documents was the second. The below-market appraisal through a connected appraiser was the third. Nolan was removed as administrator. The findings were part of the court record. Court records are public. I did not circulate the court record. I did not send it to the 6 people at the gathering or to Carol or to Theodore or to the network through which Nolan's version of me had moved. I did not need to circulate it. Philippa had been right about what tends to become known. The cease and desist had reached Nolan in the 3rd week of the process. He had not responded through an attorney. He had called me directly, which told me he had not expected the formal response and had not prepared for it, which told me the preparation he had done had been for a different version of how this went. The version where I was the complication. The version where I was too unstable to engage. I did not answer the call. He left a voicemail. The voicemail said he needed to talk to me, that this had gotten out of hand, that he was my brother and whatever had happened with the estate could be worked out between them. Between them. He said between them. As though the estate were a matter between the two of them that had been interrupted by external parties, rather than a matter that involved my inheritance, and his attempt to acquire property from it through a company he controlled. I did not return the call. He called 3 more times over the following weeks. I did not return any of them. Not because I had nothing to say. Because what I had to say was in the documents that were now in a court record, and the court record said it more accurately and more permanently than a phone call could. My aunt, my mother's sister, whose name was Dorothea and who had known my parents for 60 years and who had been part of the network through which Nolan's version of me had moved, called me in the 5th week of the process. I answered because Dorothea was 71 and had loved my mother and had, I believed, received Nolan's version in good faith without understanding what it was serving. She said, "I have been hearing things." "About the estate," I said. "Yes," she said. "And about what Nolan was saying about you." A pause. "I believed him, Addie. I need you to know that. I believed him and I repeated some of what he said to people, and I did not know what I was doing." "I know you did not know," I said. "Are you all right?" she said. "I am all right," I said. "I have been all right the whole time. I grieved my parents. That is all I did. Grief looks like struggle sometimes, and Nolan understood that and used it." She was quiet for a moment. "He used the grief?" "Yes," I said. "Your mother would be." She stopped. "I do not have a word for what your mother would be." "I know," I said. The estate was resolved 4 months after the complaint was filed. The house was sold at the accurate market value. The savings were distributed. I received what my parents had left me, the full half, calculated on the accurate appraisal and the accurate accounting of 11 months of administration. I sat with the deposit confirmation for a long time. Not thinking about the money specifically. Thinking about my parents. About the house they had lived in for 30 years that was now sold. About what they had intended when they left what they left, which was simply that their children should have it, equally, and that the having of it should be straightforward. It had not been straightforward. But it had arrived. Philippa sent me a message on the day the estate closed. It said, "Well done." 2 words. From a woman who did not use 2 words unless they were the right 2 words. I called Declan. 6 months, he said, before I said anything. He had been counting? "Yes," I said. "Are you okay?" he said. "Yes," I said. "Actually, yes." "What happened to him?" he said. I told him the professional outcome. Nolan worked in financial services. The court findings were public. The nature of his removal as estate administrator was public. The professional consequences of a public finding of fiduciary failure in financial services were not something I had to engineer. They were the natural outcome of public information reaching the industry where reputation was a functional requirement. He had lost his position at his firm 3 months after the court findings. I had not caused this. I had not called his employer or sent documents or made any contact with any professional body. I had filed a legal complaint about conduct that was legally actionable, and the process had produced findings that were accurate, and the findings had become part of a public record, and the public record had been found by people for whom it was relevant. He lost more than he expected. That was the story's truth, and I wanted to be honest about it without performing satisfaction at the outcome, because satisfaction at someone's professional destruction is not something I felt cleanly. He was my brother. He had tried to take from me what my parents had left me. He had told people I was unstable to enable the taking. All of that was true. He was also the person I had grown up with. The person who had sat in the same waiting room when our father's condition worsened. Who had stood next to me at 2 funerals in 14 months. Whatever he had done with the grief and with the estate and with the 6 people at the gathering, he had also been in those rooms. Both things were true simultaneously, and I was not going to resolve the both into a cleaner story than it was. Dorothea came to see me 2 months after the estate closed. She drove 4 hours, which was the specific investment of someone who understood that the drive was necessary. We sat in my apartment and we talked about my mother for 3 hours, the real talking, the kind that happens when 2 people who love the same person find each other and decide to say the true things about what they have lost. She said, at some point, "You proved them all wrong." I did not need to prove anything, I said. I just needed the accurate record to exist. That is what proving them wrong looks like, she said. When it is done correctly. The narrative that Nolan had built had not disappeared. Narratives do not disappear. But they had been joined by the accurate one, the one that existed in a court record and in the outcome and in the specific visible evidence of someone who had been told she could not manage on her own and who had managed, precisely and completely, the most complicated situation her life had yet produced. Carol waves at me from her driveway in the mornings again. Just the wave. The half-second pause has been gone for months. Theodore asks me how I am doing with the specific ordinary social automaticity of the question that means nothing beyond the greeting. I answer both the way I have always answered them. Because I have always been the person they see. The narrative Nolan built was not a revelation of something true. It was a construction built over something true to obscure it. The construction is gone. What was always underneath it is still there. Here is what I want to say to anyone who has had a narrative built about them by someone who stood to benefit from the building of it. The narrative has power only while the accurate record does not exist. Create the accurate record. Not through argument or confrontation or the performance of your competence for the people who have received the wrong version. Through documentation. Through formal processes that produce findings. Through the specific patient work of establishing what is actually true in a form that cannot be reframed. Find the Philippa in your life. The person who knows the system and can move through it with you. Do not try to navigate formal processes without them. The other side has attorneys and plans and 11 months of preparation. You need someone who knows the terrain. And do not let the grief be used against you. Grief looks like struggle. Struggle looks like instability. Instability, in the hands of someone who needs you to seem unable to manage, becomes a narrative. Your grief is yours. It is not evidence of anything except that you loved someone who is gone. Hold it and do not let it be taken from you and used as the reason you cannot have what you are owed. You can grieve and manage simultaneously. You have been doing it the whole time. The court record says so. Permanently. And permanently is longer than any narrative. Any narrative at all.